You want to be in the intro? Come here then. My baby, come here. There he is. Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. So today's video is going to be a Q&A, and my patrons over on Patreon asked me a lot of questions. I think I had about 45 in total, but today I'm going to be answering 23 because it's 2023. That's what I've decided. 23 feels like a less daunting number. Hi darling. You here to ruin my audio? They asked me some really good questions and I'm just going to get into it. The first question is, how are the dogs? They seem to be loving it. Looks like Quentin's found his happy place in the cab. And what about Midge? Has he found a spot that he loves besides his bed? And I love watching his zoomies. The dogs are doing really well. They're really loving it. The same as the humans. They're having a much more varied, interesting life, and it's nice to give that to them. And Midge, so he has his bed under there, underneath our bed. He's got like cozy duvets and an orthopedic mattress. But then if he wants to be more with the family, he goes up on here. It does mean that you have to kind of like perch on the corner, but it's worth it to give him a nice space. Question 2, does it ever feel like you're on one massive holiday and eventually you will return home? We haven't done uninterrupted van life very much at all, even though we've been in the van since August, September of last year, but that's been mixed up with a load of campaigning and all of the stuff that comes with that, so we actually haven't been on the move and living an uninterrupted van life for very long. It's only since we've come to Spain and we haven't had all of those other obligations, and I think because it's been this long stretch of a really lovely time and like lovely weather and exploring and having the best time, it does feel like a holiday, and we're both dreading our return to the UK. But then we will continue van life in the UK, so hopefully at that point it will sink in that it's actually something we're going to be doing for years. Question 3. I tried van life for a few days with my dog a few months ago and we both hated it. I'm so impressed you seem to manage so well, and the dogs too. I worried that you and they would find the small space too cramped. You seem happier and freer than ever. Is this true? And if so, how much of this is down to living out of a van, and how much of it is about travel, and how much of it is about living a less stressed life? I would say we definitely are happier. I'm definitely happier. This is what we planned to do for a while before we set out and actually did it, so we're working towards living this life, and now we're actually doing that, which is amazing. And actually it is better than I thought it would be. I was really worried that I was going to hate it. When we were going through the long process of getting rid of everything in our old house and packing into this van, every time I opened the van in the morning I would get a kind of nervous feeling in my stomach. I was like, oh my gosh, can we actually do this? I'm not sure if it's the right thing to do or not. I'm not sure if we're going to really struggle in this small space. But as soon as we started doing it, like the small space aspect is never been something that has affected us and our happiness. We've just really gotten used to it really quickly and are really happy. I don't feel cramped at all, and I just feel really happy and content in a small space. And in fact, we talk about a lot, if we didn't have Midge, our big greyhound, we could probably go smaller than this. The previous owners who we bought this van from have done just that. They've decided that this van was too big for them, and they've kitted out a smaller van to live and travel in, and I definitely think we could go smaller if we didn't have our big greyhound that needs a big bed. I think the happiness for me is coming from living a more varied everyday existence. I found living in our house, which was supposed to be like our dream thing, it's like the thing that everyone's told to do, and we were very lucky to be able to achieve that goal of buying our first house together. But I just found it so boring at the end and so monotonous, and every day was just really long work days and then an evening on the sofa, and it just felt so samey. I think maybe that was partly to do with everything we lived through with the pandemic. We were locked away in our houses for a lot of time, and so maybe that accelerated our ambitions to get out and explore once it was all over. I definitely think that had a part to play in it. And yeah, I just love seeing new places every day and having new experiences. It's like such a luxurious feeling. We've had this a few times where we've been like, should we move? And we just decide to get in the front and drive off somewhere else. And you can make that decision in 5 minutes and off you go, and that's really exciting and fun. I think it's also to do with living a less stressed life, definitely, because we've really lowered our overheads. So yeah, we're living a cheaper existence, which means that we can work less, which means that days are slower and there's more time outside, there's more time reading and relaxing and just being more present, and yeah, it just feels really lovely. I've really been bragging about our life there, but yeah, we're so happy. Question 4. What are some of the downsides you've experienced to daily van life? Something that is a daily task / struggle is finding a toilet. We talk about our bowel movements like way more than I ever thought we were gonna talk about bowel movements together. But you just kind of have to, because I have to organise how that's going to happen. There's another question in this list that's something about our toilet setup, so I'll talk about that later on in the video. But yeah, finding public toilets and trying to time everything properly is quite difficult. So that's one of the major downsides. You do wash a lot less than you would in a house. We have a shower off the back, which we've not used yet because it has been quite chilly, and also we haven't really parked anywhere where it would have been appropriate to use the shower yet, so we haven't done that. So we wait about at least 10 days, 10 to 12. I think the maximum we've done is 14 days without a shower. And then we go to campsites and shower there, and it feels amazing. Obviously we're doing like washes in our sink. We like boil a kettle and have like a flannel wash in between, but nothing beats the feeling of like a hot shower. And I guess I miss having warm water in a tap so that I can wash my hands with warm water or wash my face in the evening with warm water. And lastly, something that's been bothering me quite a lot is not being able to wash our dog blankets, because I used to wash them quite a lot at home because Quentin kind of stinks. He's a very cheesy pug. We haven't been able to do that because you're relying on laundrettes to do your laundry, and many of them say strictly no dog blankets and stuff, which is understandable. It's only been in the UK where I've seen laundrettes that will have a machine out the back that will wash dog blankets. So when we get back to the UK, I'm going to try and find one of those laundrettes, and I can't wait because their dog blankets really stink, and you've got to live like in really close quarters with those stinky blankets. Question 5. How do you go number 1 and number 2 in the van? I pee like 10 times a day. Do you guys find yourself drinking less water so you don't have to pee as much? At the start, when we first started living in the van, I was not drinking enough. I was worried about filling up the toilet too much. And I guess that was because we started in the UK, where it's harder to empty your toilet. When you come to Spain, there's Area de Autocaravanas, which is where we are right now. They're all over Spain, on the edges or sometimes in the middle of small towns. You can park your caravan, and they have like dump facilities where you can dump your waste and fill up your water and stuff, and it's so handy. And our toilet setup it's like a separator on top, and there's a bottle for your wee, and then there's a box at the back for your poo. But mostly we try to do our poos in toilets, public toilets, that kind of thing. Question 6. Now that you've experienced van life, how long do you think you'll feasibly live van life for? When we were thinking about trying to live like this for a while, we came to the decision that 2 years might be a good amount of time to live like this. And for now, that definitely feels about right. So 2 years would be our aim still. Number 7, as far as creating art goes, how has the adjustment to van studio been? Do you feel more creative overall as a nomad? The adjustment's been fine so far. It can be a bit intense when you've got a lot of work on, but really my plan is to not have too much work on so that I can make it as manageable as possible. And in terms of feeling more creative, I think I'm slowly getting there. In general, I do feel more creative overall as a nomad just because I've been granted the time to experiment a little bit more and work on my own stuff. Question 8. Have you been able to create a dedicated workspace that feels good? And do you have any advice for making art in a limited space? So I definitely don't have a dedicated art space. This is where I work. This is like our everything table. It pulls out and we eat around it, we relax around it, and then I work around it as well. It feels good, it feels alright, especially if I'm only working like 4 or so hours at a time, and then afterwards I can kind of shake it off and go for a walk. That feels lovely. And I would say advice for working in a limited space is definitely knowing your limits and understanding that your limits are going to be different in a smaller space. So you're going to need to take more breaks, you're going to need to work shorter hours, I would say, and maybe you need an environment to be a certain way. I definitely need it to be like clean and calm, and sometimes Craig will go off on a hike and I will paint, or he'll take the dogs out and stuff and go for a coffee, because yeah, I think I do like to be on my own when I'm working. When I'm trying to finish a painting, it's nice to have a bit of alone time. Question 9. Do you have any more plans for zines and or personal projects? I would definitely like to continue making zines. Someone else asked me if I was planning a collection of zines, and that would be my dream. I'm just at the moment just waiting for inspiration on the topic of my next zine. I definitely find that you can't really force ideas, so I'm just kind of, I put it out there in my mind. I would like to make another zine, and now I'm just waiting. And other personal projects, none so far. Question 10. What are all of your businesses' different revenue streams, and what percentage of your income does each bring in? I feel like my he's being cute. It used to be that the bulk of my work came from client work, because I used to work on like large scale publishing jobs that would take months, like maybe 4 or 5 months to do, and I would do a couple of those projects a year, and that would be like the bulk of my income. I do not do big projects like that. I'm taking a break from doing big projects like that. It would just be impossible to do in the van. So I've worked out that my percentage of income is now 60% Patreon, 30% client work, 6% YouTube, and then royalty payments is about 4%, and that's included in that is like any other one-off payments I get. And then something else to note is that I think maybe about once a year I open my Etsy shop and I'll do a sale. Question 11. Advice for new artists who want to be an illustrator. This is hard because I feel quite out of the loop on current ways of like marketing yourself as a new illustrator. I really don't know how you would do it now, how you would start. If you are a newer illustrator on the scene and you have any advice, please do leave that in the comments. I'm just going to be boring and say my usual #1 piece of advice, which is to have a really strong illustration portfolio, and by that I mean like on a website, like a really easy to use simple website with really lovely high quality images on it, and a really easy way of the client to get in contact with you. And also, once you've got that portfolio website, keep tweaking it. Don't ever think that it's done. Adding new work and thinking about what holes there might be in your website, and look at other people's websites, see what they're offering, and just keep on working and tweaking and adding and strengthening the work that you have there. Because if you don't have that strong website portfolio to start with, then you're not really going to get hired, I wouldn't think, unless you have connections in the industry. Have a really strong style that really clearly communicates the kind of illustrator you are and where your strengths are and what you want to be hired for. Have the work in your portfolio that you want to be hired for. So when I started out, I wanted to be hired for food illustrations, so I made sure I had lots of examples of food illustrations. I hope that's helpful. I have a video about making a portfolio, and I'll leave that linked. Question 12 is a complicated one that I kind of scratched my head about for a while. Basically, one of my patrons is asking about finding creative stimulation in a countryside setting, in like a smaller town, because they are debating whether they need to move out to somewhere more rural. As an artist, someone who needs creative stimulation regularly and a lover of beauty, how do you manage to find this need for creative fulfillment and inspiration whilst living in the countryside? I guess that for me, living in a city would be sapping all of my creative energy, because I find cities, in my old age, I find cities really overstimulating. I need a lot of peace and quiet, and I need that slower pace of life in order to feel like a creative person. I also think that you can get creative inspiration kind of remotely. You don't have to be in a city and be experiencing it firsthand. You can watch films, you can read books, you can just learn about the world around you and learn about different art movements, that kind of thing. So that's available living in the countryside, and yeah, there's no bigger inspiration for me than being out in nature. Question 13. What YouTubers would you recommend? any topic from art to lifestyle to education, etc. Okay, so this is just currently my favourites. I'm going to go into my history on YouTube. There's this channel, and I found out about it when I was working on my zine and I was looking for video footage of whale falls. But there's this channel called EV Nautilus, which has like deep sea cameras, and they go down and see what they can find, and it's like this group of scientists all on a microphone narrating what they see, all of the different creatures they come across. And I think they do like a live stream, and then on their YouTube channel they have clips. They put it with like really relaxing music, and I just find it so calming. There have been a few times lately when I've been feeling quite anxious because I'm currently preparing to go to court, so I'm working on my case and feeling stressed, and then once I've done that I go onto this YouTube channel and just watch a couple of videos, and it's just so magical and it really chills me out and puts everything into perspective, because there's this deep sea with all of these crazy creatures living under there, and you don't really need to worry about your little life on land so much. That's how I feel when I watch it anyway. I've also been watching a lot of videos from a creator called Mooncat. She's a British YouTuber and she's incredibly funny, and she makes commentary videos kind of like tearing into the manosphere and right-wing commentators and also British politics, and she's very good. And she has a second channel called More Mooncat, which is like her live streams, and I've really been getting into watching those lately, so that's a lot in my history. Also, I really like this channel called Climate Town. It's really comedic and also like really informative about the fossil fuel industry, and just really well done. I really recommend watching that channel. Question 14. Can I ask about any mental health or neurodiversity labels you might identify with and are comfortable talking about? When I first read this, I read it as like diagnosed with, but I haven't officially been diagnosed with anything, although I have had medication for anxiety and panic attacks in the past. So is that a diagnosis? I don't know. I would say I'm an anxious person, and anxious to the point of sometimes having panic attacks, very rarely, luckily. And I would say that I definitely fit the bill for someone who deals with social anxiety. That's something I've had for like an awful long time. And it's interesting to kind of like make the distinction between that and shyness. I think social anxiety is a lot harder to deal with than just shyness on its own. Question 15. I'm just starting to nature journal to help with my anxiety, taking time to really notice things while walking, taking photos to draw or paint from later. I'm using a pencil so far and I love it, but I'd really like to use watercolour too. What would your recommendation be for basic watercolour starter supplies? I would say that I use quite basic supplies, so I'm just gonna show you what I've got in my desk easel, and yeah, hope that helps. Question 16. While you're away, I assume you're not going to be doing any direct action on the issues that you care about. I know that you've both given a lot lately. Are you both happy to have a rest? And are you finding balance with all that? One that is sustainable for you both? So yeah, we're definitely not doing any direct action at the moment. I do find going to court as a climate activist to be part of civil resistance. So at the moment I'm preparing to go to court next month or so, and for me that's just more than enough to be dealing with at the moment, because it's really very stressful for me. It's kind of my idea of a nightmare is going to court, because I have this fear of judgment tied up in my social anxiety, and who is going to judge you more than an actual judge? Ugh. Last year was a very intense year for us both. There was definitely a lot of ups and downs to last year. And we're both just figuring out what we're going to do next, because obviously there's like a lot overlapping problems that our society needs to resolve. There's a lot of strikes going on in the UK. I'm just really hoping that these strikes just kickstart a really strong working class movement that maybe like the climate movement can build off the back of, because I just think like nothing's stronger than a labour movement in terms of like building power and solidarity and stuff. Question 17. Besides veganism, in your opinion, what is the best action that a person can do to lessen their footprint on the planet? This is an interesting question that I'm probably not going to answer in the way the asker would want. I would love nothing more for us to move away from our own personal carbon footprints. Something I deal with constantly is like guilt about every single thing that I'm doing. Craig and I have had like quite a few disagreements about that, about living in a vehicle that relies on diesel and that's like a fossil fuel, and me having like a lot of guilt about that. And actually that involved doing a load of research about all of the emissions that are tied to a house versus to live in a van for a year. And I do think that still this lifestyle, if it's your house, is less carbon intensive than living in a house, especially the house we had, which was like old. Yeah, I deal with a lot of guilt about my own emissions, and the big picture is that really I don't need to have that guilt, and neither do you. I think there are like some top things that you can do. Going vegan is like the easiest one I can recommend to everyone, and also long haul flights is something, if you can not do that, that is great, because long haul flights are so bad. Like I wouldn't recommend focusing in on your tiny little micro habits, like things that are covered in plastic and you can't avoid that plastic. Like why should you have the guilt of that? You didn't create that plastic. And also a company or corporation, often it's big corporations packaging all of our food in plastic. They are the ones that are profiting. They're making a profit off of the destruction of the environment, and all you are doing is just using that product because you need to. And I just don't think you've got as much culpability. I just think we've got to be careful about focusing in too much on our own little micro habits, because that is exactly what the worst of the worst, the fossil fuel corporations, want us to be doing. They want us to be looking at our own little micro habits and busying ourselves with that, whilst they continue to make billions in profits. So criminal, it's almost like hard to comprehend. And I wish that more people would put aside this idea of a carbon footprint. I need to do it more as well, because I still feel guilty about my own habits, even though I'm just trying my best and everyone's just trying their best. Like, we didn't invent this world, and I'm pretty sure if we had more of a say in it, we wouldn't have chosen these options that have been given to us. But the options are here because they're profitable, and they're profitable to a very tiny proportion of humans. Obviously, when I'm involved in direct action, I'm hoping that I'm leading by example. So I am saying like that is probably the best thing you can be doing, is being in civil resistance against governments and corporations that continue to disregard climate science, which is saying no more fossil fuels. Like the UK government has over 100 new fossil fuel licenses that it's giving out, and it's just approved a coal mine, which is absolutely bloody ridiculous. But yeah, that needs to be challenged, and that is more effective than just swapping out something plastic for something paper. Like, these are so micro, these choices are so micro. What you need to be doing is like using your voice and your power as a citizen and advocating for system change, because that's just going to make everyone's life easier and safer. That was a really long answer, sorry. Question 18. What are some of your favourite books regarding climate change and activism? The one that I recommend to everyone, just because I think it's like so accessible, and also it taught me an awful lot, is Less is More by Jason Hickel. This is a book about degrowth. And then a book for activism. One of my best books of 2022 is This is an Uprising: How Nonviolent Revolt is Shaping the 21st Century by Mark and Paul Engler. This is just a book all about non-violent civil disobedience and how to make it effective, using lots of case studies throughout history. And then my third suggestion is another one of my favourite books from last year. It's called As Long as Grass Grows The Indigenous Fight for Environmental Justice from Colonisation to Standing Rock by Dina Gilio Whittaker. I think this is the first book that really made me understand what environmental justice actually is, rather than just like it being a buzzword. If you've never read anything by an Indigenous author before, would also be Braiding Sweetgrass, which is a very famous book, and for good reason. It's really amazing, and it kind of reshapes your understanding of what climate solutions could actually be, and what the possibilities are, because I think we've been conditioned to think that capitalism is the only way that humanity can be structured, and I think learning about Indigenous practices and customs and their beliefs and views on how to treat land and natural resources just opens up your mind to different ways of living that aren't within a capitalist structure. Question 19. How do you choose the books you read? Do you find recommendations online or through people you know in real life? Are you a mood reader, or do you plan a reading list in advance? I'm definitely a mood reader, so I don't have a reading list. I do have on Scribd, I will just save books that I think I want to read in future, and then maybe I'll go back through my saved list. And sometimes I screenshot books that I see people talking about and put it into like a little book folder on my laptop. I think I mostly find books through people I follow online who are sharing recommendations. There's a channel I really like by someone called Hannah May. She's a British YouTuber and writer, and she lives in Holland. I think she has quite a similar reading taste to me, so I always get a lot out of her videos. Question 20. I know you have plans to go back to the UK for your trial, but I was wondering if you have any other travel plans. And then question 21 is kind of similar. Do you have any plans to go out anywhere else in Europe or stay in Spain for the winter? So once we get back to the UK, don't really have any fixed plans. We'd love to go to Scotland this year, so I think we probably will go there for a bit. And one of my dreams for ages, and one of Craig's dreams too, is to visit the Inner and Outer Hebrides. That would be a dream if we're able to do that. And then also Ireland is pretty high up on our list of somewhere we'd like to go. I think mainly we would like to come to mainland Europe to escape the awfulness of an English winter, which is what we did this year, and it's been amazing. So we might wait until the end of this year to come again. We'd love to just come back to Spain. We've really loved it, and Craig's learning Spanish, so it'll be good to come back. Question 22. The contentious, why did you decide to marry? Brackets. I mean that from a political rather than from a personal angle. No judgment, just curious. This question's quite difficult for me to answer, because although I'm like a big overthinker about a lot of things, I didn't really overthink getting married. It's a puppy! It's a baby puppy! Come on. Yeah, so I don't actually really have a very interesting answer for this question, because maybe you can explain to me what the issues are surrounding getting married as someone who's quite progressive or pretty radical politically, because I haven't really thought about it that deeply. We did notice obviously within the marriage process that there are some iffy things about like ownership of women. There's kind of that undertone to the whole thing. One of our main motivations for getting married was to have this significant day in our relationship, because we knew that we probably weren't going to have children. It was just kind of, we saw it as like a day to bring like family together and to have photographs and have this like significant day in our relationship. That seems really shallow to say. I think I'm a bit of a romantic, and I like the idea of there being records of us deciding to spend our lives together. I like being called a wife as well. I like being Craig's wife, and I like having a husband. It does feel meaningful to me and to us. I think despite the negative connotations of marriage, rightly so, that they exist as marriage as an institution. We just kind of ignore that part of it. Not very politically minded of us. And also I think it's kind of cool that Craig's changed his name to mine rather than I haven't taken his name. I like that we're like a family and we all have the same surname, like all four of us. So yeah, nothing deep really. Question 23, the last question. I have heard you hint at finding a tiny home to live in somewhere wild one day. Can you tell us more about this? Where, when, what, how, etc. I'd love to know more about your dreams and plans. So this is a good question to end on, I think. I think like a lot of van lifers, the aim is to live in a tiny home one day, but tiny homes are like far less accessible than a van. I think that would just be a dream of all dreams, to live in a small house someday where we have like a bit of land, because I would really love to be able to grow most of my own food and like learn about preserving it and storing it, and that would just be so cool and fun and a really good way to spend my days. At the moment it definitely just feels like a dream, a far off dream. It'd be nice if there was legislation that said that it was okay to build tiny homes, because it's quite different to America where you can, it seems like anyway, that you can buy a patch of land and then build a little house on it. That should be allowed everywhere, but in the UK it's much more strict than that, and it's quite hard to build like a little eco home. I think in Wales there's areas where that kind of thing is encouraged, so maybe we would live in Wales someday, but I think we'll have to be really ready to settle into one place, which I don't feel like we are at the moment. A tiny house that's like 100% renewable energy, really well insulated and cozy, and maybe has like a little greenhouse attached to it, would be a dream. And like somewhere where we can store, maybe like a larder or something, where we can store all of our preserved food, and mostly just having like a piece of land that we can grow fruits and vegetables on would be so cool. I do see van life as like a step towards that though, just because we're like exploring different parts of the world. We're going to be spending a lot of time in the British Isles exploring, so maybe we'll find somewhere that we fall in love with and that we want to put down roots. I think van life is like a step towards tiny house living as well, because it's teaching us to live in a smaller space. So basically anywhere else that we live after here will feel big and luxurious, I'm sure. So yeah, that's another positive about van life. Everywhere else you live afterwards, you'll be like, wow, so spacious. So that's the end of my questions. Well, I think what I'm going to do with the rest of the questions that my patrons have asked, I'm going to make another part 2 to this Q&A that will go up on Patreon. So if you want to go over there and watch that, if you've enjoyed this one, and if you want to go see what kind of content I make over there, then you can find the link to my Patreon below. And yeah, I really appreciate all of your support over there. Thank you so much for all of your interaction on my newest videos. I'm really glad that you're liking them. And I'll see you again soon for another video. That's the end of the video, darling, alright? Do you want to go sunbathe? Quentin want to go sunbathe? Do you want to go in the conservatory?